Tomorrow is here today, and the digital oil field is already impacting drilling operations in ways good and bad. Cybersecurity is a major topic, not only for our industry, but for virtually anyone who touches the internet. The boogeymen of cyber villainy are real and insidious, but the upside of digital technology holds great promise for improved efficiencies. One of the most promising is blockchain, the technology behind the burgeoning global internet currency, Bitcoin. Hi, I'm Mike Kiwalia, and thanks for tuning into this webcast, produced by drillingcontractor.org. We have two expert and intriguing personalities with us today to explore the good, the bad, and the ugly of digital technology in the oil field. Siv Holm is CEO of SecureNOC and chair of the IEC Cybersecurity Subcommittee, and Andrew Bruce is CEO of Data Gumbo. Their bios are available on the website. Siv, Andrew, thanks for taking the time with us today. Siv, let's start with the bad. Realistically, how seriously must we take the threat of cyber security or cyber attacks in the oil field?
I would say you should take it serious, but you shouldn't really be freaked out or scared or anything, because what's happening and what will probably happen in the next few years isn't necessarily another Deepwater Horizon, but small events that will probably lead to downtime, cost, you have to replace equipment. So I would say more annoyance than real catastrophes. But hey, who knows? So if you go back in history and you look at cyber attacks and what's happened both in this industry but also in other industries, I think it's worth mentioning sort of the first attack that happened on a control system, which was back in 2010. This attack came through a USB, which I guess we're fairly familiar with, with the challenges around that. And oops, I forgot to clean it before I brought it on board. In this case, it was probably planted, but it happened in Iran at the nuclear power plant, Natanz is the name of it, and it basically manipulated the PLCs, so it's the controllers, and damaged a lot of centrifuges. So it set back the Iranian nuclear program for a while. So you can imagine if that were to happen to you, you would have another Deepwater Horizon. And then another interesting aspect of this, I guess, in terms of staying on the scare side, would be what happened with Saudi Aramco back in 2012, where they had, I would say, a fairly non-sophisticated, almost dumb malware, very efficient though, took down 30,000 computers and rendered them less productive than what they would desire for about 10 days, including being scared of using their emails even, which is sort of in this space, but it's not in a control system aspect.
So what was the cause of that incident in Saudi Arabia, Siv?
The cause of that was probably a state-sponsored attack, which for most of us is not anything we need to worry about. And there's a similar kind of state-sponsored attack that's relevant as well that happened in Ukraine, 23rd December, day before Christmas Eve. 2015, where it's believed that the Russians, so again state-sponsored, took out the power for more than 230,000 subscribers for between 1 to 6 hours. So those are the serious part, and those are the ones that you read about in the paper. And they're not what you should be worried about unless you're operating in sensitive areas where you would need to take additional caution, but you would do that anyway for piracy, kidnapping. You should follow the same risk evaluation as you do with all of the other risks when it comes to this. But what we do know, especially here in the US, is that it's fairly active on the attack side. On the US ICS CERT, which is the government agency responsible for responding to attacks that are on critical infrastructure in the US. They responded to about 290 incidents in the official year 2016.
290?
Yes, which is steadily increasing. A lot of them are in factories, in the grid, and other, not necessarily oil and gas.
Mm-hmm.
But any land-based, such as pipelines and refineries, would be something that I would put on a higher risk than my assets offshore, actually, just because it's easier accessible.
Mm-hmm.
How about land rigs?
I think land rigs are so, pardon me for saying so, most of them are a lot primitive. So I would still think that they would, be physical, combined with physical attacks. I'm not seeing somebody, trying to hack into the Wi-Fi close to a rig to do some damage, unless there is a specific reason for it, like activists or
Yeah.
those sorts. But I'm not seeing that they're acquiring the skill set to do that. Again, varies, depends on where you're at, and it depends on the general risk situation in the area. Those are the things that you read about.
Right.
What you should be worried about is what's happening every day. And that's not what we've been just discussing, which are called advanced persistent threats, which means they're very sophisticated, they're usually done by very intelligent adversary, they're very targeted, and they will stay hidden for a long time. Those are APTs. So the one in Ukraine, the one in Iran, which has been believed to be there for several years before you actually saw anything, that's APTs. What a normal rig owner should worry about are the everyday stuff, as I said, malware, viruses, Trojans, and based on the fact that they have, we have older operating systems, Windows XP, even Windows 7, some older Linux, although that's harder and less attacks or viruses for that operating system, it's still an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And people move in and out with their own computers, their USBs, and also, since this is a back-to-back work, isolating on an isolated island, it's a little boring. Then your entertainment side usually probably brings in more than 50% of your challenges.
And there are a lot of third parties going
Yes, that's
to
true.
rigs and offshore and whatnot. So
Yeah.
I can see that's a real challenge.
It is, but as a security professional and looking at the risk situation at this point, I wouldn't say that I would worry about anything being targeted, like a third party, hiring somebody from a third party actually maliciously hurting you. So like the towers, for instance, the Twin Towers,
Mhm.
getting a job in Schlumberger, getting themselves to a specific rig to do harm. We're not in that situation.
That'd be a little paranoid to
Yes.
me, envisioning
We're-
that. Then. That's good.
Exactly. but we're just in a situation of, not necessarily being good enough in the cyber hygiene area.
Yeah. Are drilling assets really a target? Hackers and other people interested in attacking offshore assets or even land assets?
This again depends, and it will depend on sort of each region. So if you go to Norway has a risk assessment of all of the sort of assets that are within the Norwegian territory, and the same here. And in addition, here in the US, you have an assessment that goes on the ports. So any ship that comes in and out of the port and then comes up the ship channels. My reading of the focus from the Coast Guard is that the worry and the risk assessment of risk, cyber-related risk, is probably higher on the port side
Mm-hmm.
than anywhere else, because you could do more damage.
It's easier to get to a port than
Exactly. And
offshore 200 miles.
yes, but also think about the damage you could do. If you were to, let's say, manipulate a satellite system or the position navigation system, I would think you could smash it into the port, perhaps even a small explosion, depending on what's on board, depending on what's in the port.
So what are some of the solutions, Siv? Especially what are some of the low-hanging fruits, easy to do solutions to protect ourselves?
Well, I think that's what the IEDC ART Cybersecurity Subcommittee is all about. The low-hanging fruits, the easy solutions, and to be frank, what you should be doing anyway. So we're not focusing on protecting against state-sponsored attacks or malicious insiders. We're basically, or even targeted outsiders or hackers. We're looking into, cyber hygiene and making sure that if you get a virus, you can sort of limit the damage it does, and trying to prevent anything from sort of traveling on your remote connection with your real-time data anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So from onshore to offshore or the other way around. What we've done over the last, I would say, 2-3 years, after we went through looking at, what are the standards out there, can we reuse, what's the actual situation, and so on. We put together a 2-year work plan, which is basically all about cyber hygiene and minimizing the damage and the consequence if something happens. So, for instance, the first IEC Cybersecurity Guideline that came out 2016, March, I believe.
I think so, yeah.
Was about risk assessment.
Just for our audience, Siv here has worked diligently for, like she says, last 3 years. First through our Advanced Rig Technology Drilling Control System Subcommittee, and now, that was such a big effort, now through the dedicated IDC ART Cybersecurity Subcommittee, and has produced these guidelines, which here they are on the screen right here. And can you give us some highlights of what is in the original guidelines, managing risk for drilling assets, Siv? And we'll move on to what you all are doing now.
Yeah, sure. But I also like to say that this is not just me. It's also a member effort.
That's true.
I'd like to point that out, and we're getting more and more volunteers.
That's good.
So people are
volunteers are welcome.
Very welcome. So the first guideline started with the beginning, So unless you know what the risks to your asset are, you're not going to be able to do anything sensible with it. So therefore you have to do a risk assessment. So nothing rocket science. We took a well-known standard, the only one for control systems and automation systems. So the ISA or IEC 62443 used to be the ISA 99. They have a dedicated one on risk assessment for automation and control systems. We tailored that one for drilling assets, including scales. So basically help or support for you to assess the actual risk, the consequence, and the frequency. Because on a drilling asset, you're not only worried about cybersecurity, you're worried about safety, environment, business continuity, and cybersecurity is down there, but not the most important part. So that's what the first guideline is about. And then we're about to publish the second one, which is once you've done your risk assessment, hopefully you've done that now, since we published it.
Right. Okay.
If not,
step 1.
Probably good to do it. And then step 2, which is the baseline, so guideline for baseline cybersecurity for drilling assets. It's basically the baseline. So it's the flooring. It's the minimum. This is what you should be doing. But it doesn't mean that you have to do all of what's in there, because that will depend on whether it's a land rig or a sophisticated drill ship. So there's no one size fits all. And then step 3 is, although the second guideline is telling you what to do, it's not telling you what to do exactly. So because that would be too much for one guideline. It's giving you the highlights in terms of following the NIST cybersecurity framework, looking at identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, and then just giving or describing what the baseline for drilling assets would be. Then the next one that's coming out is guideline for network segmentation, which is a core feature that you would need in order to prevent things from propagating. And then
what's the timeline on that?
It's supposed to come out for review in March.
Okay.
Seadrill and BP are editing that one, and then multiple members are being an interim review group to sort of help bring in everything that all of the, or some of the members already do into this guideline. So not reinventing the wheel, just tailoring it, polishing it.
Okay.
And then we're moving forward with cybersecurity training, which again, cyber hygiene, you know, what to do, what to think about, you know, just small tips, just to... Something
everybody could use, really, right?
Exactly. So I'm not sure if I used this one at the ARC conference, but it's just the perfect image of cyber hygiene, where it was a video that came out in Norway a few years back, and attributed from NorSys, which is industry focused cybersecurity advisory. They had this video where they were going to show you, think about passwords, and you have a brush and like a toilet brush. You see a person start cleaning the toilet, and then the person moves into the kitchen, start cleaning the dishes, and then eventually goes into the bathroom, and then straight for, heading for the teeth. And that's when it says stop, wait, think, and it says don't use the same password everywhere. Exactly, and that's what it's all about. So
common sense.
Exactly.
Some sense, anyway.
Yes.
Yeah. Here's a link to our Advanced Rig Technology, or ART committee, of which the Cybersecurity subcommittee is one. We'll be announcing these dates for upcoming meetings very soon, so please stay tuned and watch all our periodicals. We'll announce these dates. So, but we're not doing this all in a vacuum either, Sibs. Are we collaborating with other groups and organizations? Can you tell us a little bit about what IDC is doing there?
Most certainly. So ever since, I would say, when cybersecurity was just a work group, it got formed May 1st, 2014 actually. One of the major tasks was to try to figure out what everybody else is doing. And so API and Coast Guard, any of the agencies of relevance both here in the US and in Europe, so European Commission, trying to get an overview of standards and regulatory aspects, and that sort of led to the early beginning of a collaboration with API, which has now been formalized. There's been multiple joint meetings. We've had joint meetings with the Coast Guard, API, but also the Offshore Operator Committee. And that was specifically in respect to the ongoing work at the Coast Guard on developing a MODU profile. So actually a tailoring for a MODU of the NIST cybersecurity framework.
Tell everybody about the MODU profile. That was quite an effort. But what does that mean, MODU profile?
So a MODU profile, so the Coast Guard, they came out with their cybersecurity strategy summer 2015, which laid out a strategy for improving cybersecurity internally in the Coast Guard, but also any of the vessels that are in and out of U.S. Coast Guard, or U.S. Coast Guard regulatory water, or U.S. waterways. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
U.S. waterways.
U.S. waterways, yeah. Navigable waters, I think, is what the Coast Guard.
Exactly.
That's their portfolio.
Exactly. So they defined 5 areas that they wanted to not regulate, but come up with voluntary guidelines. MODU is one of those. They kicked off the work December last year, so a year ago, and then we had a joint meeting with them in January this year to look at the core aspects. So defining the mission objectives is what they call. So what are the most important aspects of a drilling operation, which is safety, obviously, environment, business continuity, efficient operation, and so on. So not cybersecurity related, but core aspects that you need to achieve. And then the Coast Guard is collaborating with NIST and MITRE, and they're actually doing most of the work.
National Institute of Standards, and
Technology.
I don't know what MITRE stands for. Can't remember. I don't know what MITRE stands for.
It's a governmental research agency. I forgot what it is.
Subcontractor,
Yeah. And they've gone through multiple rounds. So myself and a few other members from IDC and from API have given them feedback to try to, I tend to say that keep them sober. So let's not go all out here, but let's focus on what we can do and think about cybersecurity in a long-term perspective. Like, where should you be at 10 years, 5 years, and what should you be doing the next year? And this is basically the Coast Guard taking the NIST cybersecurity framework, which came about directed from Presidential Directive 21, and which mandated DHS and NIST to do the work. And so they've actually been given responsibility to develop the framework.
Okay.
And you can look at the framework like it's the basement of your house. So,
Okay.
but it has lots of different types of basements. So you need to sort of pick the part that fits with your house. So that's what the Coast Guard is doing with their profiles, and the profile is then
Modular approach.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, Sib. So the downside of digital technology is its vulnerability to attacks, but if you take cyber caution and cyber cleanliness as seriously as one would take seriously cleanliness of their dishes and even their toilet bowls, you should be all right. Pay attention to to your machines, and don't do anything stupid, basically, right? So, but on the other hand, the upside of digital technology is its incredible ability to organize data. And one of the most celebrated of which is the technology called blockchain, which, as we mentioned before, is an enabler of the internet currency Bitcoin, which is just burgeoning in value past the $11,000 mark here the other day. We're speaking in very late November at this time. To discuss this, we have Andrew Bruce. So Andrew, what is blockchain and why do you think it has applications in the drilling business?
Blockchain, as you said, is the technology behind Bitcoin. But I think that there's a tendency to lump them both together.
Okay.
And if you were to say that we were going to be using Bitcoin or gumbo bucks or some cryptocurrency to be transacting business in the oil and gas space, obviously that's not. I don't think anybody's suggesting that. But blockchain is a technology which one component of it is smart contracts and distributed ledgers, which I think does have applicability for the oil and gas business. At its core, it's designed to work in an untrusted environment. The idea of having a distributed ledger which can execute terms of a pre-agreed contract automatically increases the efficiency of transactions and gives access to savings to the various participants in the industry, which are very, very difficult to realize today. I mean, companies have been trying to figure out how they can get access to the, some people call them micro KPIs. If you talk to some of the big oil and gas companies, they're looking at the 10, 20, $100 million savings that are available on some of these drilling assets, but there's hundreds. It's kind of like long tail theory. That was how Amazon makes the money on books, right? Is they make a lot of money on the big blockbusters, but in reality, a lot of the money is made on the long tail. So if we can use technology to drive down the average of the KPIs and use that to access the money that is available, then there's hundreds of millions of dollars there. A good example is drill pipe connections. I mean, I think we've all sat and watched drill pipe connections, and they're fairly boring, and you don't really pay too much attention to them, right? If you make hundreds of drill pipe connections, and you can save a minute on that connection, then it starts adding up over time. And if you can incentivize the drilling contractor and the operator to reduce the drill pipe connection times, or it could be, we've identified about 40 different KPIs now that can be measured and agreed on in advance, and then you execute that contract in a distributed fashion. So going back to the blockchain, having the distributed ledger and having the algorithms run on multiple computers which then all have to match up with each other. Then you've got verification of a transaction that can be trusted and run automatically and drive the cost out of the equation.
I'm just having trouble seeing how the computer technology, I understand that it's on multiple computers at the same time, and that accounts for a lot of the security, but how does that reduce the KPIs? How does that help lower the time of, for example, drill pipe connections, as you say, Andrew?
Okay. What gets measured gets done, right? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. So if you're on a day rate contract, you're going to take as long as you feasibly can to drill that hole. But if you are given an incentive to do it quicker,
sure.
So what we're seeing, the discussions we're involved in, is that the drilling contractors are prepared to put some of their day rate at risk in return for being able to participate on the upside. The reason that we arrived at blockchain is not because it's a sexy buzzword that is interesting. The reason we arrived at it is because the operators are sick of paying for services which they may not have received, and they've got armies of people going back and looking at transactions and seeing, okay, did we actually receive the service? And the contractors on the flip side are sick of not getting paid for the service that they're providing to improve performance. So it's an untrusted environment. Neither of them really trusts the other, and they don't trust that they're going to get paid, and they don't trust that they're actually paying for what was delivered. We first started talking about this with one of the big one of the big operators, and they're very keen to access the savings that are available through just reducing drill pipe connections, for example. But how do they work with a drilling contractor and come to an arrangement where they can both be and have the incentive working in the same direction? Because right now it's in the drilling contractor's best interest to take as long as they can to drill a well, right?
That's one model, yeah.
If they're on a day rate.
That's a day rate model.
Yeah, so I mean,
sure,
you need to be drilling and differentiating your company, but I mean, you're paid if you're paid on a day rate. So if we went into a discussion and said, okay, if we could reduce this drill pipe connection, if you make 21 million drill pipe connections per year, and you can save a minute, that's worth approximately $250 million a year. So if the drilling contractor is prepared to put some of the day rates at risk, and if they can earn that back again, with the incentive to actually earn more if they improve it, we've had discussions where they said, look, we know we can make these rigs more efficient, but why would we? And you've been involved in discussions for a long time. The industry's been saying, how do we come up with a more interesting contractual model? I mean, there's two things you need. You need an integrator, and you need a new commercial model. So what I believe is that the blockchain and the distributed ledger piece of it in particular is going to enable a completely different commercial model between all the players, which is going to be good for the industry as a whole. We'll be able to drill for oil and gas at cheaper prices. It'll be good for the drilling contractors because they'll be able to differentiate their rigs. They'll be able to get paid for the actual performance that they deliver, and the operators will be able to work with contractors who are aligned with their objectives, and only pay for what is actually delivered.
And it's all around the distributed ledgers,
yes,
right?
Yes,
and the security and the trustworthiness of that information.
That's
right?
exactly correct. Because the ledger is distributed, it can't be changed by any one party, which is kind of goes back to the whole question about trust. So because the transaction is run on multiple different computers, it's immutable. It can't be changed. So without the transaction becoming invalid, and that goes back to the part of the cybersecurity aspect of it as well, is that even if you hack one machine, it's unlikely that you're going to hack all the machines. And so you have a distributed ledger which is immutable, which means that the data can't be changed, and the counterparties can trust the results of the calculations.
Okay. So relative to the globe, the E&P sector, and especially the drilling sector, is relatively small. So is this using blockchain solutions, this major technical advance, is that kind of like hitting a fly with a sledgehammer, or
that's a good question. That's a really good question, because I kind of go back to what I said. Why are we using blockchain in the first place? I mean, are we doing it because it's the next cool and sexy thing?
Yeah.
No, obviously not. You're right. I mean, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies like that, they rely on the calculations happening on millions of computers around the world. Well, we're not suggesting that. We're suggesting that you have a private blockchain between the participants in a transaction.
Okay.
So that it's not open to the public. It's not open to the world. It's a private blockchain that you use between the participants in a value chain. And that way you can manage the scope, you can manage the security, and it solves the mistrust problem. I mean, companies have been trying for years to figure out how can they lock down the savings, because you can go out there with a stopwatch and you can time, how long it takes to make a connection, or how long it takes to do whatever it is on whatever activity it is on the rig. But as soon as you turn around and look at the next thing, the time on the one you were just watching goes up.
Yeah.
So what we're doing is we're as one of my colleagues calls it, the eye of Mordor is stuck there, right? So what you end up with is you have the ability to really implement lean best practices. So if you go to Toyota, one of the premises behind what they do is they say, okay, we're going to identify what's wrong with a process. We're going to come up with a best practice, and we're going to keep that there. We're not going to repeat the same mistakes we made before. So by using these micro KPIs and locking down performance, you incrementally start coming up with a lean best practices opportunity. So you can take the 25, 30, 40 different micro KPIs and make the whole operation more efficient. And then the natural consequence after that is that say, okay, well now I need to be able to pass that on to my sub-suppliers so that the efficiency goes through the whole value chain.
And how much does data quality have to be tied into this too?
Well, obviously, if it's crap in, crap out.
Yeah, right.
We have spent a lot of time building a data platform that cleans the data, standardizes the data. We can read it from multiple different sources. So we have a standardized model that we work with. So there's essentially two big steps that you have to take. You have to agree between the counterparties what the source of the data is, and you have to agree on the definition of it. So if it's a drill pipe connection, is it slips to slips? Is it weight to weight? What is the definition of that? Once you've agreed on the source of data and the definition of it, then you can program it and you can test it. And you can do back testing. If you've got bad quality data, then you can decide what you want to do with that. I mean, you have to, once again, it's between the different counterparties how they want to handle it. Does it go back to the old day rate, for example, for that period of time? If there's downtime, does it go? You have to have a default position.
Okay.
But yeah, obviously, data quality is a huge aspect.
And I guess obviously you feel the technology is mature enough. It's ready for prime time, as they say.
It is, yeah. I mean, once again, I think we're lagging in this industry. I mean, the financial industry, the insurance industry. I mean, you can buy a house on blockchain right now. So I mean, there's a lot of industries who are ahead of us, and
wouldn't be the only area for our industry.
Right.
God love us here.
Right. So I mean, but I think that we're not as far behind as we typically have been.
That's good.
Yeah,
that's encouraging.
So, I think that it's an opportunity to take a new technology, which is actually quite simple, and apply it for a crucial part of the business, which will drive efficiency and it'll be good for all of us, actually. Okay.
So kind of give us an idea of how your solution works. And care to elaborate on any of that, Andrew? On how your
Yeah, sure. So I'll give you an example that we're talking with right now with a major operator and a contractor. We sit down with them and we say, okay, here's the menu of KPIs that you might be interested in, or if they have others, then we will look at those. You sit down and you say, okay, well, what's the source of the data? What is the what's the algorithm for calculating that KPI? And then we take a trailing average of that KPI, and we compare the latest performance of the KPI with the trailing average. If the performance is better than it historically has been, then there's a bonus paid, and if it's worse, then there's a penalty incurred. The distributed ledger will run on the data gumbo servers, and the two counterparties, or three counterparties, however many counterparties there are. Mm-hmm. The calculation runs periodically. We've been aiming for daily, which is freaking people out, because then your accounts receivable time goes to 0, which is interesting, an interesting opportunity. Yeah. And so we connect into the ERP systems, and we run the calculation every night on all the machines that we need from the different counterparties. We run the calculation, and if there's whichever way the money flows, we automatically run the transaction between the 2 or 3 different ERP systems, and a transaction occurs. Okay. And we take a fee in the middle.
Okay. What's the reception been in the industry? We're pretty old-fashioned. Are you getting positive responses when you talk about this?
I can tell you the very first time I ever talked about it in the room, I was very self-conscious, because it's a problem that we all acknowledge exists, right? I mean, it's this lack of trust. How do I know that I'm going to pay? Because I mean, these people are famous for paying the bonus and enforcing the penalty but not paying the bonus. I've been thinking about blockchain for a long time and just been watching it and just kind of laughing about it, to be honest. But then it solves a very specific problem that we've got, meaning the lack of trust. I mean, it solves that problem. So the first time I ever introduced it to a potential customer, I said, when you finish laughing, let's have a discussion about it. So we had a good laugh about it. But then if you start thinking about it logically, it makes perfect sense. It solves the problem. Yeah. It's gone from, well, that's kind of a joke, to actually that does solve the problem, and it drives a lot of cost out of the equation. It drives a lot of time out of the equation. It solves all the mistrust problems, and it's a very elegant solution to a pretty intractable problem.
Very much so. Well, thank you, Andrew. That's really very good food for thought. Could be quite revolutionary. Obviously, I'm not the first person to think that. And thank you, Sib, for scaring us about cybersecurity, but also giving us some ways to avoid becoming victimized ourselves. And the first thing I'm going to do is go out and run a virus scan on my laptop. If blockchain can come through and mitigate, I won't say entirely remove, but at least mitigate the adversarial nature of our contractor, operator, vendor, OEM, service company world, then it'll really will be a win-win, and not a win where it's win squared and both of the wins are on the same side of the equation, as has usually been the case. So I think we've all had some good food for thought here today. And once again, I want to thank our panelists, Siv Holm and Andrew Bruce. Thank you all for participating. And thanks to you all for sitting in and watching this and absorbing all this. It might be a little like drinking from a fire hose, but this video will be out on the website for the indefinite future, number of months. Feel free to come back to it, refer your friends to it as well. And I thank you all for tuning in. I'm Mike Kilalia. The video is produced by drillingcontractor.org. Thanks a lot. Keep it safe and keep turning to the right. See you next time. Bye.